Hello, friends. I hope everyone had a fantastic Halloween. I hope everyone had some good treats, and I wanted to start a new series where I pretty much just talk about everything I watched in the previous month. I'll give my quick thoughts and impressions on films that I was able to log on my letterboxd, but wasn't able to dedicate a whole video to. So without further ado, I started off October with a classic. Getting into the spirit of the month, of course, I watched the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Boy, is this a timeless film, and while it's not my favorite version of Nancy, as she's still too green and hasn't kicked it into the higher gears yet, this is just a wonderful start to a beautiful franchise. Robert Englund, I mean, the man just recently got his Hollywood star, and deservedly so. When you're watching the film, you can just see the potential oozing from this entry, and I want whatever Wes Craven was on to have the clarity to have such a brilliant idea. Honestly, my only issue with the movie is how long it takes to fully reveal Freddy, since this is kind of a mystery, but this is more of a retroactive issue because of the sheer size of an icon that Freddy is, and because I know how much more is left in store for the rest of the series. Then I watched Red Room. Jeez, I mean, what a knockout experience watching this thing. From literal minute one, there's a heavy blanket of uncomfortableness. It's a movie that has been on my radar since last year, and this movie does not disappoint. The subject matter is extremely dark, and while you never get to see anything as it kinda cuts away right before anything happens, I found myself constantly clenching my fist because of how upsetting it feels. But that's not to say this isn't a great movie. It's got a brilliant performance by Juliette Gariepy that perfectly plays with the most fragile scale, where she lets slip her perfect balance on reality, and before you know it, it's absolute madness. Next, I watched One Battle After Another. As I said in my dedicated review, this movie is so damn good. Call it bias since I'm a big PTA fan, but every scene in this thing is so epic and gripping, and it's just impossible not to have a great time with the movie. I'm definitely due for a rewatch because the more I think about it, the more I like it. Leo is hysterical in his very naturalistic delivery, and that's often my favorite kind of humor. Then I watched Dangerous Animals. This one snuck up on me since, to be honest, I'm not the biggest shark horror fan. I love sharks and think they are cute and extremely lovable, and because of these very indisputable facts, I'm not the biggest fan of how often they're treated as the villains in movies. Jokes aside, this movie is awesome. Not only is it scary and stressful, but what an original way of making a shark movie not just be about how a shark is lurking in the dark for 70% of the runtime. An actual interesting villain and a scrappy lead make for a fantastic set of duels that will leave you speechless by the end. Next, I rewatched the original Black Phone in preparation for the sequel. An icon of a villain that didn't necessarily need a sequel or a franchise to be considered an icon, and a strong set of heroes that are given such a unique situation to work off of make for a very gripping and exciting movie. I love the paranormal elements of the film that never feel awkward against the very grounded side of the story. I also reviewed this, and I just think this is a very solid film overall. Then I watched After the Hunt, and damn, if there was a letdown of the month, it'd be this one without a doubt. I love Luca Guadagnino. I think he's a very smart filmmaker that convinces me he's extremely capable of making these very raw and personal films feel so accessible. Challenger, Suspiria, and Call Me By Your Name are such strong movies in my opinion, and with a cast as strong as this one, I was sure it was gonna be amazing. Despite individually having strong performances by Julia Roberts and Andrew Garfield, the rather weak script eclipsed the otherwise solid acting. The film sugarcoats itself with high-level academic jargon to cover up the fact that the narrative itself is actually shockingly shallow. It inevitably came off pretentious and disingenuous, which is so weird considering who made the film. There was a far stronger interest in showing this superficial level of intellect that these characters possess instead of really getting into the thick of a pretty interesting concept. It never felt like the movie was allied with either side of the generations, and that's fine, but because of how dry and mean it felt, I just felt bitter by the end, just like Alma. Character motives contradicted with the actions of those same characters. It just felt like an unsure script, like, Luca, what happened? Tar is a much stronger and assertive version of this descent into madness. There's a good movie in here, but the final cut of this thing is sorely lacking Luca's passion, which is very strange because it's always present in his other movies. For a tagline as ironic as not everything's supposed to make you feel comfortable, there should have been a more unapologetic grit to this thing. But hey, everybody has misses and he's only human, and this is definitely a miss by Luca. Next I watched Halloween, H2O, and this is easily in my top 5 of the franchise. It's practically a staple to my October watches, and largely that's just because of how different this one feels to the rest. Set in Cali, where honestly, as much as I miss Loomis running around, I don't know how he would have fared on a college campus. Jamie Lee Curtis is fantastic, as per usual. Since this is post-Scream, you have a good group of characters in LL Cool J, Michelle Williams, and of course Josh Hartnett. I love the homages to Psycho with Janet Leigh, the beautiful score that plays as she's walking towards the iconic Psycho car. I think, honestly, my only issue with the movie is that at times it feels a little too self-indulgent with how many callbacks there are to the previous films. Overall though, it would have been a great conclusion to this franchise if not for those damn clauses that wouldn't let him go. Then I watched it. Dear lord, it's been a while since I rewatched this movie. This movie is treated as sacrilege, and I agree with most of the reasons. However, Jackie Earle Haley isn't one of the many faults of this film. What he says is garbage, and I can't believe it made it to the final draft since this is blatant character assassination. But his physical performance is actually quite nefarious and cynical, which is what I'd want from Freddy. But the bad CG, the constant recreation of scenes from the original, as a matter of fact, this is literally just a copy and paste of the original. For me, I don't consider myself as opposed to remakes as some other people, but I just request something new on the same subject matter. Give me something I haven't already seen, otherwise what's the point outside of just cashing a check on a big IP? The micronaps is the only actual input that's actually interesting, but it's not enough to absolve the movie of the crimes that it commits. Then I watched The Black Phone too. I get a lot of the reasons why there's people that prefer this over the original. I actually like a lot of the new things introduced, and speaking of the devil, it's like the closest thing we've gotten to a new Nightmare film, so I really enjoyed those supernatural elements of the film. But the plot convenience of how the grabber functions and why he doesn't do things that are seemingly common sense just so we could get more runtime feels very annoying. The performances by Mason Thames, Madeline McGraw, and of course Ethan Hawke as the grabber make for a very entertaining movie, but ultimately, even after a break from this movie, I'm still not convinced that the existence of this movie was necessary, and that's fine. Next I watched Triangle. This movie is bonkers. So much about this movie feels like a fever dream, and I want to believe that's the point of the movie. This movie made me realize hallucinating at sea must be among the most horrifying experiences imaginable. This movie is so fun and funny and wacky, there's plenty of show-shocking revelations, and it's impossible to predict what's gonna happen next. I love this movie, and yet I can't make any sense of it. May-December, going from probably the most unserious watch of the month to a set of movies that are just completely gut-wrenching and uncomfortable. I don't know how that happened. This is an incredible film to the point that at some point I was convinced I was watching reality and not fiction. That's just how much the actors sold it. Also, due to the fact that it's likely based off of Mary Kay Letourneau's situation, this was just such a devastating watch. Julianne Moore, to no one's surprise, is delivering a career-defining performance right alongside all her other career-defining performances. Natalie Portman was a perfect counterbalance to Gracie, while also consistently showing the viewer how she's at the very least as equal a monster as Gracie, and yet by the end finds out how she too was strung along the entire time. Gracie's inhuman ability to manipulate the people around her is horrifying to watch. And Charles Melton, do I need to say more? Easily the strongest performance of the three, his ability to devolve into a child so naturally with subtle yet noticeable mannerisms and actions are the most devastating part about the whole thing. Easily one of the most powerful films of the decade. Next I watched The Perfect Neighbor. This is a newer Netflix documentary that's shot almost entirely from police cameras about how a woman in a Florida neighborhood constantly was calling the cops about the kids in that neighborhood. Things escalated and tragically ended in murder. It's an intense showing of the reality of abuse of established laws and the consequences of injustice. By the end of the movie, yes, there's a sense of justice and catharsis even, especially when you see there's no remorse from the perfect neighbor. However, it didn't fix the damage. The bleak future that awaits this neighborhood is so disturbingly harrowing. At the very least, there's a beautiful message about community and how there's strength in community, and that with enough support you won't be silenced or ignored. I understand the exploitative feel surrounding the project, but however ugly it seems, there's a strong need for exposure on subject matter like this that people deal with and struggle with every day. Ultimately, for that audience is why the project was created, regardless of other ulterior motives. Then I watched Lolita. I don't know why I did this to myself. The sheer existence of this movie is more interesting than the actual movie. The film, for obvious reasons, is uncomfortable, and despite having good performances and a really beautiful score, it just never worked, obviously. I feel there's certain stories that no matter what extraordinary elements you include, they will never get a positive viewer reaction because of the nature of the topic. I'm not blind to the notion that this is obviously from Humbert's perspective. The fact that he literally says, "You cheated me of my redemption," tells you he thinks he deserves sympathy. That's just how much of a sociopath he is. There's plenty of movies that are told from the villain's POV that I enjoy, but this specific subject matter is just too ugly to ever be done on screen in a sympathetic or enjoyable way. And then I watched the Bruce Springsteen biopic, which I recently reviewed, and the more I've thought about it, the more I'm certain I've gotten the most I can get out of this thing. Is this a movie about a dark period in Bruce's life? Yes. Is there an intention of exploring the mental health struggles among men and dealing with the past to be able to look forward? Yes. Is this movie sorely lacking enough depth to hit as hard as it wants to? Also yes. I get it, not every movie has to be a bag of laughs and they don't always have to be exciting. There's plenty of miserable movies that I love. However, this movie is trying to talk about these things with such a thin script. I also never felt engrossed in the world or felt like I could connect with any of the characters. For a movie that's asking for understanding, it's not ideal that the viewer can't connect with the person. This is a movie which is entertainment first and foremost, and at least for me personally, I wasn't able to click with the movie, and that's okay. Then I finally got to watch Uncut Gems. I've never felt so drugged and sweaty in my life. This felt like I got in a freaking F1 car where right from the start I'm going past 100 with no signs of slowing down. From the first moment of the film to the last, the adrenaline is through the roof. The sharp editing and the hyper-erratic overlapping dialogue makes this thing so energetic. There's an intoxicating excitement that makes this movie so much fun. And almost poetically, by the end, you are floored by how kinda out of nowhere the ending hits you. And besides all the fun and thrills of the film, there's a good little message about the consequences of gambling and not knowing when to stop raising the stakes. Yeah, this movie's truly special, and this is just another example of why I prefer Adam Sandler's dramatic roles significantly more than his comedic roles. Then I watched Let the Right One In. On rewatch, this is without a doubt one of my favorite vampire flicks. Hoyt Van Hoytema, the guy that shot Dunkirk and frickin' Oppenheimer, shot this and helps explain why this movie looks so damn good. This movie not only looks gorgeous, but it's also a really compelling tale about a relationship between these two kids. In fact, this is a true love story because at its core, beyond the blood and gore, it's a really gripping love story, the kind that doesn't get shown anymore, which sucks. I love when a simple movie can create such a tangible atmosphere because it shows that the film pays attention to detail. I also love the choice of making the boy be the one that needs saving. It's a very refreshing and still shockingly rare thing to find. The horror, while not constant, is very effective and shows up when necessary, and because of that, the few sequences that indulge in horror are so good. Because who could forget that pool scene? Then I watched Stir of Echoes. I was craving a ghost story, and Kevin Bacon delivers an actual interesting and unique story. This movie has that early 2000s feel, but it's actually used to great effect, which surprised me since I'm not the biggest fan of that era. Usually ghost stories tend to feel a little predictable, clunky, and the mystery element of the film can feel anticlimactic, but here I found myself constantly intrigued with where the story would go. I liked how real Tom and Maggie felt as a couple, which again helps emphasize her want to help him. There's actually good payoff by the end that makes the chaos that Tom goes through actually worth it. It's a solid little horror film that honestly deserves more credit than it gets. Next I watched Yugetsu. It's probably my favorite film I watched this month, I think. It's got a surreal feel about it that makes it so I can immerse myself so easily in this truly frightening situation. I absolutely love the message about the dangers of greed and the exploration of the lengths to how far these two guys would go to get what they want. Unchecked ambition really is a poison. A true mastery of storytelling is on display as Mizoguchi can seamlessly blend reality and fantasy to the point that certain reveals hit me like a freight train. There's a beautiful sense of synchronicity between the two worlds that allow for hauntingly ethereal moments whilst also having plenty of very real horrors as well. Despite the black and white color palette, this feels modern and accessible enough for any modern viewer to enjoy. Overall, this is just a really important and phenomenal film that I truly enjoyed. Then I watched The Village. Poor M. Night. This is a great film that proved either he was ahead of his time when he released this, or the early 2000s indeed was a dark time for film. I love the tempo of this film. It feels very fairy tale-like, which I don't doubt M. Night was going for. The movie is patient and shows you everyone in this village is so weird, but you just accept it for what it is because you know at some point it's gonna make sense. Honestly, whatever your opinion is on the big reveal, it's hard to deny the sheer tragedy of it all. The manipulation of the innocent, and even if the innocent discover the truth, they'd be too ignorant to know that they do. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's probably one of my favorite of his filmography. It's really that good. And lastly, I watched Come to Daddy. What a fun little surprise to end the month with. This is Elijah Wood just being bored and saying, I want to make the most wacky movie I can get my hands on. Its absurdist approach primes you surprisingly well for the shenanigans that occur throughout the film. There's plenty of twists that you genuinely don't see coming, and some hilarious sequences too. Sure, the script is underwritten, and at times it can feel melodramatic to then be undercut by like a ridiculous character decision, and surprisingly, for the runtime only being 96 minutes, I think it could have cut out at least another 10. But overall, with a title such as this one, I got more than what I bargained for. And that's it. That's all the movies I watched in October. I'd love to know what you watched, and if you watched any of these, what were your opinions? But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.